Welcome to Postmedia's special edition of the Ottawa Senators panel. It's our Christmas, as if you couldn't tell, our holiday season sweaters are on. There's Steve Warne from the Steve Warne Project right here. Look at this podcast project, sorry. Look at this, very, very spirited.
Thank you.
Bruce Garrioch, very spirited with the spirits as well.
Yes, I have a beverage pocket in this one so that we can have a nice drink after we're done here.
And Santa showed up after his game to be here. So, guys, we're just going to look at the season that's been so far, and we got into Christmas, and maybe, first off, some players who maybe have been kind of gifts for the organization this year and have taken off. I mean, where would you start? Guys that have maybe been surprises.
Well, Anthony Duclair comes straight to mind. Guy who's gone from naughty to nice as a player. He's been just fantastic for them. The skill has always been there, speed. But we have echoing in our heads the thoughts of John Tortorella just before the Sens acquired this guy, and he said this guy doesn't get it. He doesn't know how to play. All those things, and so. It looked like maybe a throw-in on the Dzingel deal when it happened. Like, kick the tires on this guy, and it probably doesn't work out. But the more I watch Anthony Duclair, he absolutely goes on the nice list.
Well, and it's interesting because when they got Anthony Duclair, Pierre Dorion basically said, we're going to take a look at him. We'll see where he fits in, and we'll see how he does. And there were no expectations for Anthony Duclair, but cheers to him. He's played well so far this year.
Oh, and the speed, just to finish up on Duclair, I mean, the speed is, you can see him forcing mistakes in the opposition. The other night, went in a game earlier this month against Philadelphia, the defense and the goalie, they're confused because he's right on top of them, ends up getting a freebie goal, and he's got a few of those because his speed is creating things. And there is an excitement you can see in this guy, the way he's playing. And I think that's good for fans and young fans. You just see somebody actually enjoying what he's doing out there. And I'm gonna toss to you here, Steve, on this one. A guy who's enjoying what he's doing with a smile on his face, but it's not always the most cheery kind of play. It's edgy. He's got an edge. He's a throwback, and I'm talking, of course, about Brady Tkachuk.
Yeah, he's been terrific. The opposition might say he's naughty on some nights, but he's been real good for the Ottawa Senators. And I love the expression that DJ Smith uses to describe him. He drags us into the battle. And that is a challenge for so many teams. It's an 82-game schedule. It is hard to conjure up the fire you need 82 times a year. I don't think Brady Tkachuk is going to allow his teammates to do anything but show up to the rink with fire and compete.
Well, I think if the C in Christmas tree this year should stand for captain for Brady Tkachuk, because I think he's just a natural choice for this team. I think one of the things that you really see is that Brady Tkachuk is a Tkachuk through and through. He plays the way his dad did in a lot of ways. He has a lot of his brother has a lot of the same traits as him. He competes every night. As you said earlier, Steve, he leads them into battle. He's done a terrific job. It's kind of interesting because people kind of question that pick, Kenny, when they made it,
absolutely.
And they absolutely question it. But he has been nothing but a hard competitor for this team, and as we spoke of earlier, when he's the kind of guy who, if they sat down with Thomas Chabot last summer, they'll absolutely sit down with Brady Tkachuk in the summer.
What I also think is interesting about Brady Tkachuk is he's not perfect every night. There's things he crosses the line or mistakes he makes, and he'll make a defensive error here or there. But then he's creating traffic at the other end, and he's creating errors on the other side. I just think in terms of guys who dictate the pace of a game, and that's, you talk about captain and the tempo of how your team is going to play. That's where I think Brady Tkachuk should get to see. I agree with you, Bruce. I maybe switch this a little bit to the goaltending. We were a little unsure going into the year how this was going to play out, and there's been bumpy rides. I think Anders Nielsen has been pretty good for the most part, and maybe stolen the number one job away from Craig Anderson.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind he's their number one goalie right now, and I think you have to tip your cap to Pierre Dorion. He gets a lot of grief about this or that, but that deal and several others has been just fantastic. Like, think about what you got a number one goalie, and by the way, he's playing quite well this season, and you gave up Mike McKenna and Tom Pyatt. Yeah. Like, come on. Who comes up with a deal like that? And it's been fantastic. And so I look at the way he has played. He's been, there's been a couple of leaky nights, but every goalie has them. Generally speaking, he's provided some serious stability, as has the new head coach. But That's paramount. If you don't have goaltending, you don't have anything.
Well, he's really been a steadying influence, and I know that people have talked a lot about it here. Is down the road, Marcus Högberg probably next year is going to be the number 2 goalie for this team. The expectation is that Anders Nielsen will be the number 1 goalie, and that they probably won't bring Craig Anderson back next year. But Anders Nielsen is also going to force a decision probably on Craig Anderson at the trade deadline. If there is, look, you need a team to get an injury before there's any interest in Craig Anderson or bad goaltending. And people have talked about the Sharks. I think it's more the injury scenario that the Senators are going to need for somebody to pick up the phone. They didn't have any interest in Craig Anderson last year's trade deadline. I'm not sure there will be this year, but we'll see where the injury situation is at.
The contract, the tail end of the contract, right? He had this year remaining on it. Get towards the end of that contract, maybe somebody takes a flyer and say, look, just as an emergency almost, a guy who's had a decent amount of playoff experience, and he did have the run in 2017, so maybe that's where he goes. Maybe we can turn the page here a little bit, guys, that maybe need to pick up their game and haven't had a great start. I mean, I don't know if to throw Mikhail Bodkar under the bus or whatever, but his career is over, and he's playing through the string here. But in terms of some young players who need to pick up their act a little bit, Colin White's been a little shaky. He had some injury problems early, but maybe he's started the year as Brady Tkachuk's first line center, as a center for Tkachuk, has slipped down the lineup a little bit. Is he got to pick up his game just a little bit?
Oh, I think he has to pick it up a lot. Like Bruce was talking about with Connor Brown, there's a lot of things to like about the player. He does what he's told. He's a coach's dream, but you got to put the puck in the net, particularly for a guy like Colin White, who just signed a pretty decent contract for starting next year. So he's being paid to score starting next year. He's got to get his act together as far as contributing to the offensive side of things, because this team is really committed to this kid.
And it's not effort, Steve. I think it's a situation, Ken, where the guy signed the deal. I think it's 6 years at $475. He signed the deal. I think he's putting too much pressure on himself. I don't think it's lack of effort by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's more about he's worried about not producing the way he thinks he should produce.
Right, and it's a tricky one.
Oh yeah, it's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope when you fall into that trap.
Right. In terms of, other guys, defensively, I think they've straightened out some of their. The one guy, we go back to Christmas and positives, has been Mark Borowiecki. I don't think we can.
And Dylan DeMello.
Yeah, these guys have been very, steadying influence on a team that needed it, right? Because a young team. But you look around and you go back to training camp and the blow that Christian Wolanin took, we don't talk about it much, but I think that, we talk sometimes about Eric Brandstrom, and maybe they had to force him in because Wolanin got injured, and if there's wishes for this team, I think it would be Christian Wolanin to get his health back, whether he can play this year at all.
Yeah, it's another puck mover, and I think that that was probably the game plan, that he was the guy that would get the start here because he's more NHL ready than Brandstrom was, and that was the thought at the time. And but injuries forced stuff to happen. It was a fluke incident, and out goes Wolanin, so they had to make a decision. They felt like Brandstrom at the time was their best option. And it turns out that, in hindsight, if you could do it again, maybe you don't do it that way. Maybe you let Lajoie come back and play another 50 games this year for the Sens as he did last year. But, I think the defense has improved a lot this year. And one of the big things was addition by subtraction. I honestly think Cody Ceci was at a state in his game where he needed to be somewhere else, and Zaitsev as well. He's been, I think, an improvement on Cody Ceci this year.
I think heading into the Christmas break, I think the DJ Smith deserves some credit for pulling this group back together, because I really think at the end of last year they were coming apart at the seams, and I thought that Mark Crawford in some ways, cleaned it up the last month or so, but I think that certainly you cannot complain about this team's work ethic every night.
It's like building that Christmas fire, right? You got to put the foundation of it to get it flowing, and it's going to take a while before it takes off. But I think that the building blocks are in place. Hey, thanks again
That's beautifully said.
The very spirited Bruce Garrioch and Steve Warne. Thanks once again for tuning in for our holiday edition of Post Media's Ottawa Senators Panel.